So I've been wanting to make a video on this topic for quite a while, and now that things are actually moving and changes may be taking place, I think it's finally time for it to happen. So a bit of context for those of you who are totally confused by the title and have no clue what this video is about. Basically, the World Cube Association, which is responsible for governing Rubik's Cube competitions all around the world, has 18 events, and they've had 18 events for quite a while, and one of those events is 3x3 with feet, or solving Rubik's Cube with your feet in the fastest time possible. A lot of events are just different types of puzzles or things like that, whereas this one uses an entirely different part of the body to solve the cube, which is extremely unique to this event. So probably in part due to its uniqueness as an event, there's been a lot of controversy around it. A lot of people think it's too weird, a lot of people just really don't like it and don't think it should be in the WCA, whereas a lot of other people practice this event, enjoy it a lot, and think it should remain. But as of last year, the WCA announced that they are planning on removing feet in 2020, which caused a lot of controversy and continues to cause a lot of controversy throughout the community. So the decision is not set yet. Despite a lot of things that are definitely working against it remaining an event, there are still ways that we can work to keep feet as an event in the WCA. And one of those ways is that the Regulations Committee is going to be releasing a community-wide survey eventually, where they'll ask opinions about various regulations, one of which will be, should feet stay, should feet go? So basically, my goal with this video is to try to convince as much of the community as I can that feet should stay, and that there are valid reasons to keep it as an event. So hopefully once the community-wide survey comes around, more of you guys will vote in favor of feet. So at this point, many people have made many arguments for and against feet, and I think the Regulations Committee is fully aware of them. My goal is really just to convince as many of you guys as possible that feet is an event that should stay, and if enough of the community does support it staying as an event in the WCA, I really don't see how there's a way that they could feasibly remove it. So that's my goal with this video. I am trying to convince you of something. Fair warning. Okay, formalities out of the way. Here's why feet should stay. So a lot of people do say that feet makes cubing look unprofessional, and that's one of the biggest arguments I've seen for removing it. And I just really don't think this is the case in any way. Sure, there are definitely going to be some people who look at people solving Rubik's Cubes with their feet and say, that's weird. But I think those people are going to be the type of people who would look at anybody solving Rubik's Cubes and think that's weird. Anybody who cubes knows that non-cubers often give funny reactions, and will ask questions like, what's the point in doing this? Or like, why do you solve Rubik's Cubes? And I don't think feet solving is going to make that any more likely to be asked. But I think we should be focusing on the good reactions that people have to cubing, because there are always going to be those people that write it off as a weird, nerdy hobby that's not interesting or useful or anything like that. But I think we should be focusing on the positive reactions that people often have to cubing. I think a vast majority of people you meet, if you tell them that you solve Rubik's Cubes, they think that's really cool. And then I think if you say, I solve Rubik's Cubes with my feet, I think they're way more impressed. I think there's a very negligible amount of the population who's going to see Rubik's cubing and think that's cool, and then see feet solving and say, I don't like this anymore. I just really don't think that's a portion of the population that's really statistically significant, and so I don't think that's really anything we should be worrying about when it comes to professionality. Also, people often make the argument of why are we worrying about professionality, and I think that is valid. Sure, the WCA should be a professional organization, but when it all comes down to it, it is a very nerdy hobby that we have here that we're working with. I think there are definitely ways of being professional given that constraint, but I don't think removing feet is really going to help with that cause at all. I have seen people argue often that feet gives bad publicity to cubing, which sort of falls under the unprofessional thing. But I would argue that this is very much not the case, except in a few certain circumstances, which I will talk about now. So there was a news article recently that discussed that cubing is a bit of a freak show, or something along those lines. That was the headline, and it was discussing feet. So a lot of people like to take this out of context and say, wow, the news is calling cubing a freak show because we solve cubes with our feet. But if you actually look in the article, it was actually a delegate of the WCA who explains that a lot of people want to remove feet because it's perceived as a freak show. So I don't think that's a good move to say to the media, because, if you call your sport a freak show, that is clickbait. That's something that they're going to want to put in the title. So basically my point is the media themselves are not going to generate this idea that cubing is a freak show. That just happened to come from a cuber who was upset about feet being an event. And I actually think that is a very unprofessional way to address cubing. I don't think that's the fault of feet. I think that's the fault of cubers not really addressing their hobby in a professional way. Real quick, one thing I forgot to say when I was recording this, if you actually look in that article, you'll see that they're actually still very pro feet as an event, despite the negative information they were given by some members of the community, which I think in itself kind of says that the media is not going to be biased against feet. If they're fed negative information about it, sure, they'll present that, but I don't think that the media is generating those ideas on their own. I'll leave a link in the description to the article so you can read it and decide for yourself, but I think it's pretty clear that they are not opposed to feet as an event and actually think it's pretty cool. Anyway, now I've got some more positive examples of feet in the media, so back to the video. So Daniel Rose Levine is currently the world record holder for feat solving for single and average, and he has had many like publicity and media related appearances just because he is the best at solving Rubik's Cube with his feet. He was on a popular TV show called To Tell the Truth. Check it out if you haven't seen it. It was pretty cool to see him on there. He's been featured on like many news shows and things like that for his feat capabilities. And in those broadcasts, it's always portrayed as this really interesting skill that Daniel happens to have, and all the newscasters and everybody are always very impressed by it and very interested in it whenever that sort of thing comes up.
Oh my goodness, look at that. Moving his feet.
And I can speak to this personally too, so I don't have nearly as much success in cubing as Daniel does. But after US Nationals last year when I won Pyraminx, I had a couple like appearances on local news networks and things like that. And I specifically remember for one of them, the whole article was about how I won Pyraminx, right? But they asked about other events too, right? So I went through and gave them sort of an idea of what events they had. And the ones that they really hung on to and wanted to see were 3x3 blindfolded and 3x3 with feet. So straight up, they came up to my room, I did a blind solve for them, I did a feet solve for them, I did some Pyraminx too, but one of the things they really wanted to see was that I can solve a Rubik's Cube with my feet. So if we're talking from a publicity standpoint alone, that is totally not a reason to remove feet. I can think of many other events that don't get nearly as much publicity attention as feet does. So I don't mean to bash people who have practiced these events at all. I think every event that's in the WCA has a right to be there, and I think they all bring something new to the table. But as far as publicity goes, I think feet is one of the best events at it. I think the real clickbait is this person can solve a Rubik's Cube with their feet in 16 seconds. And the reason for that is that everybody knows what a Rubik's Cube is. A lot of the other puzzles that the WCA offers, nobody really knows. Like, I do Pyraminx, right? And I will fully acknowledge that as far as publicity goes, that's really not a good event. It all comes down to, like, how many recognizable words you can fit into a title, right? And so you could say pyramid Rubik's Cube, but people don't really know what that is. Nobody can grasp that who's not a cuber, right? Or who hasn't had experience or exposure to Pyraminxes before. But I think what really gets reactions are objects that people already know, right? The Rubik's Cube, everybody knows that. But then you throw Rubik's Cube with feet onto that. Everybody knows what their feet are, and everybody knows that they are not dexterous with their feet. And so you throw Rubik's Cube with feet into a title of an article, and people want to click on that. People want to see that that can happen, regardless of what the time is, right? People just want to see, oh, you can solve a Rubik's Cube with your feet. How is that even possible? So yeah, I would definitely argue that the publicity thing is not a reason to remove feet as an event. And honestly, at that point, I think we've kind of covered all the counter arguments. Basically, all I've seen is that it's unprofessional and it gets bad publicity. But I really just don't think either of those is a valid argument. Just from what I've seen personally, firsthand and secondhand through DRL, I just really don't think that that's the case at all. I think feet provides a lot of positive attention to cubing, and it gets a lot more people interested and knowledgeable about it, which I think is definitely a good thing. But yeah, now we're going to just move on to talking about the pros of actually keeping feet. So the first point that I think is extremely important is diversity in events. I think the WCA needs to have a diverse event list, and the reason for that is that it allows cubing to appeal to a wider audience, which is essentially what we want. So correct me if I'm wrong, I believe the goal of the WCA, or one of the big goals, is to, get cubing to as many places and as many people as possible. And obviously, as an organization, the WCA wants to grow. Having a diverse group of events keeps people interested in the hobby longer. That's just a fact. It basically allows cubing to appeal to people of like many different skill sets and many different interests. Like, just to give you an idea of what I mean, right? 2x2 is very Algon TPS based, but it definitely also has that attribute of block building for your first face. Whereas something like 7x7 requires a lot more intuition and look ahead, and also just raw TPS. And then you can look at things like blindfolded events, which require insane levels of memory training and practice to get good at, and also just like alg optimization and TPS as well. So a commonality you might notice is that TPS kind of applies in all these events, but I would say there are probably two events where this is not as much of a factor. Obviously, one of them is fewest moves, and then the other event that appeals to the low TPS category of people is feet. So when you're turning with your feet, there is just a limit to how many moves per second you can do. I don't know what that limit is. DRL's probably pretty close to it. When you watch him do feet solves, the way he turns is just so impressive, but at the same time, he's not reaching like, even 4 or 5 TPS, which, if you're world class at 3x3, obviously you're hitting something like 10 every solve. So one thing that feet really favors is efficiency. So when I do feet solves, I definitely solve very differently to when I do 3x3 solves, in that my F2L is a lot more efficient. I use different algs for last layer in order to optimize like my move count and everything like that. Basically, I would say feet is sort of the closest we can get to a fewest moves type event that remains in the realm of speed solving. It is just an entirely different skill set, because if you look at people who maybe have really good TPS on 3x3, that wouldn't transition to feet very well. The TPS is something that you can just sort of, push through on normal 3x3 solves, and you'll be fine. But with feet, it's totally different. You have to be solving efficiently because there is pretty much a maximum TPS that you can reach. So I average around 36 on feet, which tells me that I'm probably hovering around like 1.5 turns per second. And like I would say 2 to 3 is really like sort of the limit for just turning with your feet. And so for that reason, the main thing that you really need to practice is just finding efficient solutions, which other events really don't value as much because there are other options for getting fast. With feet, nobody's going to be doing 10 TPS solves. That's just not a viable option to get good. You're going to really need to put in practice to find efficient solutions and come up with creative ways to do things that you might not see in a normal speed solve. And of course, turning with your feet is a skill in its own. That shouldn't be overlooked. It definitely is a big thing that sets it apart from every other event. And that's basically why feet is a very unique event. It appeals to people who have really efficient solutions and maybe like solving in creative ways, both appendage-wise and solution-wise. And so for that reason, it does make cubing appeal to a wider audience. I posted on Facebook about this video asking for some reasons people had as far as why feet should stay or why it should be removed. And so John Meter, hopefully I'm pronouncing that right, who's a feet solver from the US, said that he really doesn't solve any events other than feet anymore just because of that aspect of it. It's totally different from a 3x3 solve because of the way that efficiency affects it so much. And for him, that's something he really likes and really appreciates in an event. And I think that's something that shouldn't be overlooked. There is a significant proportion of cubers who really like doing things that you don't find in normal 3x3 solves, and that's why we need diversity in the WCA, and feet totally provides that as an event. Call me out on this if it's stupid, but feet is just a fun event. I legitimately think that a large proportion of the people arguing against removing it have never done like an average of 100. And I legitimately suggest it. Feet is a really fun event. Like, I definitely thought it was weird before I started too, but then I sort of sat down, did some solves, and I was like, wow, this is fun. I'm improving. I'm seeing like different things that I wouldn't see in normal 3x3 solves because I have more time to plan out my solutions. And it's just like really fun solving a cube with something other than your hands. It's definitely a fun break from handed events too. One of the big reasons I started improving at it was because my wrists were actually hurting from like doing too much pyraminx or something like that. So I decided to take a break and do some feet, and I had time for my wrists to get better and I didn't have to stop cubing, which was like a win-win. But yeah, legitimate challenge to the people who are opposed to keeping feet as an event. Do an average of 100 on 3x3 with feet and get back to me and tell me that it's not kind of fun. Sure, it's definitely not for everybody. Like I said, diversity is what makes cubing great. It's not going to be an event that everybody likes, but I do think we would have a significantly larger proportion of people competing in it if everybody tried it out. That sort of segues into another small reason that I think we shouldn't remove feet. Before its removal was announced, feet was really growing in popularity. So around 2 or 3 years ago when I was first getting into feet, I remember North American record was around like low 40 seconds or so, and I was really excited because I had a chance at beating it because I was averaging around the same at the time. Needless to say, I never did get North American record, but since then, the average has literally halved. Daniel Rose Levine has the world record average now. It's 20.58, I believe, and so many other people have gotten really good at this event in the past years. I used to legitimately have a chance at getting a record in this event a couple years ago, and now, just this past weekend, I got a 27 single, which is 10th in North America. So basically what I'm saying is people are really improving. People are enjoying this event a lot. We're seeing levels of feat solving that we never could have imagined in the past, and it just seems wrong to cut it off at such a turning point in the event's lifetime. The year or so before the WCA decided to remove feat, so many more people got into it. And since the WCA announced it's being removed, even more people have gotten into it. A lot of that may be because a lot of them want to get results in before it's removed, but I think a lot of people found an event that they really enjoy after it was announced that it was going to be removed, which is honestly really sad. I think it is just really frustrating to see all the hard work that people have put in, especially so recently, to see all that hard work just sort of go to waste if the event is removed and, records can never be broken again. I think the event is still young. It's improving at such a fast rate. So many people are still getting into it. And I just really want to see it pan out before it's just cut off like that. And one more point that I really need to bring up, I feel like this is kind of the kicker. There is no precedent for removing events that don't have legitimate organizational issues with them. Feet does not have any organizational issues. It's a bit of a hassle to organize, sure. You need to move the stack mats to the ground and, maybe get gloves if people are uncomfortable touching feet cubes, but it doesn't have any regulatory issues that make the results harder to validate. Big blind also requires a very strange setup. And like clock, for example, oftentimes clocks fall over, so they need special covers for them. These are just issues that we deal with because we like the events. If you don't like feet, you don't have to have it at your competition. Simple as that. You don't have to compete in it if you don't like it. But for the people who do like it and want to deal with the hassles of having it at a competition, it doesn't make sense that the WCA should be able to say that they can't do that. But the reason I bring this up is because Magic and Master Magic are the only events that have been removed in recent history, and the reason those events were removed is because they were legitimately difficult to regulate. You can look through the WCA's reasoning for removing those events, and basically it boiled down to the fact that they were hard to regulate. Feet is not hard to regulate. Feet is slightly difficult to organize, but it's not hard to regulate. The results are all very accurate. Magic results were slightly less so, which was a reason to remove it as an event. Feet does not have that problem at all. But yeah, so basically those are my thoughts on it. Call to action now. Once the survey comes out, I'll link it in the description, and I might make another video on it. But please do respond to the survey for the regulations committee, regardless of what your opinion is, if you want it to be heard. I really hope I've been able to convince you that feet should remain an event. There are so many reasons for keeping it, and I really wanted to fit them all in this video, so hopefully I was able to do that. But yeah, that's going to be about it for this one. Thanks for watching, hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you on the next video. Save feet.